the story of Daniel in the lion's den from your Sunday school days, but do you remember why it happened? So I'm going to ask you to open your Bibles to Daniel chapter 6, and if you need a quick reference, it's on page 868 of your pew Bibles. And we'll be reading verses 1 through 23. It pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom, with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. The satraps were made accountable to them so that the king might not suffer loss. Now Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, "We will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel, unless it has something to do with the law of his God." So the administrators and the satraps went as a group to the king and said, "O King Darius, live forever. The royal administrators, perfect satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or man during the next 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, O king, issue the decree and put it in writing that it cannot be altered, in accordance with the laws of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be repealed." So King Darius put the decree in writing. Now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. "Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or man except to you, O king, would be thrown into the lion's den?" The king answered, "The decree stands in accordance with the laws of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed." Then they said to the king, "Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day." When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. Then the men went as a group to the king and said to him, "Remember, O king, that according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed." So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the rings of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" Daniel answered, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angels, and he shut the mouth of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight. Nor have I ever done any wrong before you, O king." The king was overjoyed, and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. May God add his blessings to this reading. So this reading takes place when the Jews are in Babylon. Daniel was an honest, trustworthy, hardworking confidant of King Darius and a devout man of God. He was also a Judean. King Darius was planning to put him in charge of everything. His co-workers didn't want a foreigner telling them what to do. They couldn't find anything to charge him with, so they plotted against him, and all they could come up with was his devotion to his God. Daniel was in the habit of giving thanks to God 3 times a day. We read in verse 10 that when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he knelt and prayed as he always had. Daniel knew the type of men who shared governmental authority with him. He knew they would be watching. He knew they had set a trap. But Daniel also knew the God he served. He humbly knelt down and prayed, giving thanks. At this point in his life, Daniel is about 80 years old, so kneeling was probably not an easy task. Can you remember as a kid actually kneeling in church? Now we're afraid we'll get stuck there and we'll be unable to get up. Sometimes I wonder if God thinks that's a good excuse. I remember as a child spending the night at Grandma's house. I would watch as she removed what seemed like layer after layer of undergarments, and when she was finally ready for bed, she would kneel beside the bed, which seemed like an eternity, and then she would say her prayers. In my mind, she had more important things to do, like rub my back until I fell asleep. I was thankful for that, at least. Giving thanks. Max Lucado shared an experience while living as an American in Brazil. One day, as he was walking along the street on his way to the university to teach a class, he felt a tug on his pant leg. Turning around, he saw a little boy about 5 or 6 years old, with dark, beady eyes and a dirty little face. The little boy looked at the big American and said, "Bread, sir." He was a little beggar boy. Mr. Lucado said, "There are always little beggar boys in the streets of Brazil. Usually I turn away from them because there are so many and you can't feed them all. But there was something so compelling about this little boy that I couldn't turn away. So taking his hand, I said, 'Come with me.' And I took him into a coffee shop. I told the owner, 'I'll have a cup of coffee and give the boy a piece of pastry, whatever he wants.' Since the coffee counter was at the other end of the store, I walked on and got a cup of coffee, forgetting about the little boy because beggar boys usually get the bread and then run back into the street and disappear. But this one didn't. After he got his pastry, he went over to this big American and just stood there until I felt his staring eyes. I turned and looked at him. Standing up, his eyes just about hit my belt buckle. Then slowly his eyes came up until they met mine. The little boy, holding his pastry in one hand, looked up and said, "Thank you, sir. Thank you very much." I was so touched by the boy's thanks that I would have bought him the store. I sat there for another 30 minutes, late for my class, just thinking about a little beggar boy who came back and said, "Thank you." Giving thanks was a priority for that little beggar boy. In Luke, we find Jesus traveling through Samaria and Galilee, and he came across 10 men suffering from leprosy. They were sick with an incurable disease. They were marked as untouchables, kicked out of fellowship with anyone except other lepers. They begged at a distance for anything and everything they needed. It may have just been a distant prayer, but that cry was heard. The response from Jesus was a command, but it was a response. Jesus heard. Jesus gives them assignment within the law. He tells them, Go and show yourselves to the priest." Can you imagine what it was like for them? Surprised by this response from Jesus, did they look down at their hands and see the decay? Did they see there was no change in their appearance? Exiled from all of society, how could they go and show themselves to the priest? Yet it was their only option. So they proceeded to walk through the streets to the temple to present themselves to the priest. God often answers our prayers as a result of our own obedience. And so we read, as they went, they were made clean. They looked at their hands, and the skin was restored. They stroked their faces, and the sores had been healed. They peeked under the bandages, and the signs of decay had disappeared. Their fingertips and ears were back. They were made clean. 10 people that day received the benefits of God's grace. 10 people were reached by the love of God and made legally and ceremonially clean. But 9 of them kept on going without a backward glance. Only one returned to give thanks, and he was a Samaritan, a foreigner. As he worshiped and gave thanks, he became whole. God worked on his heart and set him free. Where were the other 9? What value did they put on their healing? Did they give credit to the priest in the synagogue rather than to God? Did they ever give thanks? I wonder if their healing remained in a remission or if it returned. We don't know. Even in this modern age, we see ingratitude. People remain the same throughout the ages, always wanting God's blessings, but forgetting to say thanks. When you give thanks, are you thankful for automatic dishwashers that make it possible to get out of the kitchen before the family comes in for their after-dinner snack? Are you thankful for children who put away their things and clean up after themselves? There's such a joy you hate to see them go home to their own parents. Are you thankful for gardening because it's a relief to deal with dirt outside the house for a change? What about smoke alarms that let you know when the turkey's done? 1 Thessalonians 5:18 says, "Give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus." Yes, give thanks for dishwashers and rusty old cars, children that behave and the ones that don't, flowers and weeds, sinks full of dirty dishes, washers and dryers and air conditioning. All the things we consider modern conveniences belong to us because of God's design. Give thanks in all circumstances, good and bad. In some part of Mexico, there are hot springs and cold springs side by side. It's great for washing clothes. Women bring in the clothes, they wash in the hot, and they rinse in the cold. A tourist watching said to the guide, "I bet they're pretty thankful to God for these springs." But the guide said, "No, senor, there is much grumbling because he provides no soap." It's easy to be thankful for the good things in life. Our families, our warm homes, good health, good jobs, our freedoms, and good friends. But why would we be thankful when a loved one gets sick, when a marriage ends, when we lose a job, the car breaks down, or there is no soap? Because adversity makes us stronger. Believe me, I've lived it. A knife that never sees a sharpener will become dull and useless. Thanks is a very small word, but it carries a big punch. With only 6 letters, it's capable of delivering a message that no other word can do. When that little word is missing, we feel it deeply. When someone doesn't say thanks, we feel hurt, used, ignored, and taken for granted. We wonder why we bothered to do something for that person in the first place. James 1:17 tells us every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of the heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. We have because God gives to us. Have you ever complained about something? We all have. Complaining is so easy. It's easy to find fault with things that happened, isn't it? Didn't Paul write something about that? You remember the verse, complain without ceasing, in all things be ungrateful? No, Pastor. Paul said, give thanks in all circumstances. We can get upset by some little thing, and before we know it, we are complaining without ceasing. This is so very easy with family members, a spouse, a parent, or a child. The husband spills the coffee. Be thankful there is more in the pot. The child's room is a mess. Be thankful the child is healthy. Mom is tired and grumpy. Be thankful she's still with you. The teenage son or daughter dents the car. Be thankful that they're safe. Daniel was in a pickle. His co-workers were conspiring against him. They persuaded King Darius to pass a decree that would entrap and eliminate him. He was an elderly man with wisdom, and he was devoted to God. Daniel put his life on the line to worship and give thanks.